During the recess, the clerks have been very busy updating our listing of bills that have committee reports. So I will go sequentially, and it's Bill 84. Senator Ben Pangilinan.
Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to move that Bill 84-32 COR, as amended by the committee, be placed in the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss the bill very shortly.
Any objection? Hearing none.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we continue to look at what is happening with the resources of the government of Guam that have been appropriated and made available to the departments and agencies of the government of Guam as they continue about in meeting their mission to the people of Guam and the constituency that they serve. And when we looked at one of the areas in which I think there has, we were reviewing during the mid-year budget review, one of the areas we noticed that was resulting in a significant shortfall from appropriated resources is the Guam Community College. Now, the Guam Community College, in addition to its appropriation that it receives from the general fund to meet its operational requirements, also gets funding for its apprenticeship program through the Manpower Development Program, or a fund. And the Manpower Development Fund is funded, of course, by a $1,000 fee on all of the H-2 workers that are imported into Guam. And when we looked at what has been happening there, we noticed that the Guam Community College has not received the allotment it requires to meet its obligations from the appropriations that were given to it through the Guam Manpower Development Fund. And so we're kind of looking and see, with the expansion that the Guam Community College has enjoyed, with the new services that it's providing, with increasing enrollment every single quarter or semester, that it really is hampered when it's not able to meet its obligations and it doesn't get the resources allocated to it through the general fund, in this case, the Manpower Development Fund. So we were looking at what's the mission of the college has been, and what could logically serve a purpose of augmenting the resources to the Guam Community College. In addition, the Guam Community College has continually been one of those stalwarts of the government of Guam with regards to intelligently and diligently and effectively and efficiently deploying the resources that it gets from the general fund and from appropriations by this body. And it hasn't had an increase in its appropriation over the years, even though we've seen it increase its capacity and its infrastructure. Whenever it increases its infrastructure, it actually has been one that has been very diligent in that when it increases its infrastructure, it provides enough planning in the resources it gets for that increased infrastructure improvement to ensure that its operating cost gets reduced, so that when they build a new building, they build it LEED certified, so that they're able to put in solar panels that reduce the cost of operating the buildings with electricity. So these kind of innovation that the Guam Community College has been able to practice has resulted in it not getting any more money, even though it continues to expand its student base and its service base. And so, in looking at what occurred, the committee looked at how can we get it more resources. And so we looked at what was available. And so we looked at the Tourist Attraction Fund, since a lot of the programs at the Guam Community College also support the tourism industry. And so we looked at what was available, and we originally had looked at the Tourist Attraction Fund and the amount of supporting operations and programs related to our workforce industry in the amount of $2 million. And what we did was we went back and we kind of looked at the appropriation and what was going to be available. given the other proposals that have been put forth that would fund the Guam other programs related to the tourism industry out of the Tourist Attraction Fund. And so upon input from the Committee on Tourism, our committee itself, taking a look at some of the outstanding obligations under continuing appropriations that are in some cases, years old, but are still on the books as obligations. Originally, we thought that anything that was older than 3 years, 4 years as a continuing appropriation, we should have just discounted and said it's already lapsed, but it didn't. So originally we said we wouldn't count that as an obligation, but for prudent, being more fiscally prudent, we counted it and we added it back in as an obligation. Even when we did that, we find that we can still support with the remaining balance with the Tourist Attraction Fund of the amount of $1.5 million to the Guam Community College out of the Tourist Attraction Fund. And so when we did that recapitulation, we started out with the fund balance in FY12, which showed a $4 million fund balance. Then we looked at these old continuing appropriations of $2 million, and we're probably going to go back during the budget cycle and reevaluate those and whether or not we should just wipe them off the books and put that balance back into as an available balance of that. But there's $2 million in there. And then all the other most recent Public Law 3123 and Public Law 31270 and Public Law 281, and what those appropriations are out of the Tourist Attraction Fund. And when we come to that, plus the revenue tracking increase that we are experiencing in the Tourist Attraction Fund for this fiscal year, we find that once again that $1.5 million will be available in addition to supporting the other proposals that have come forth from this body to support tourism-related development programs. And so, again, we tend to punish people who are able to manage and be tight and be efficient with the resources we give them, but that only can go so far. And I think the Guam Community College, in its expansion of its program, the way it's managed its money, it's time that we gave them a little bit more and reward them so that they can continue to deploy those resources efficiently to workforce development that will support our tourism industry as well as the other industries on Guam in terms of providing trained employees and so forth. So I ask my colleagues to work with me on this, to support this additional resources to the Guam Community College, where we know it's going to be put to good use efficiently and effectively in the programs that it has to support the industries on Guam and the workforce development programs on Guam. And so I ask my colleagues to once again please give this your due consideration and ask for your support. Thank you, and Sidusmasi, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Pangilinan. I have Senator Yamashita, then Senator Munya-Barnes. Any other senator wish to be heard on the bill? Senator Limtiaco.
For allowing me to speak on Bill number 84-32. Mr. Speaker, I am so very pleased that this particular measure is on the session agenda. And to echo some of the comments by the previous speaker, you have to go up to Guam Community College to appreciate what it is today. And truthfully, yes, it is true that Dr. Okada, the president of Guam Community College, did a fantastic job at expending her ARA monies. Mr. Speaker, she took the $9 million and with her team and with partners across the community, Mr. Speaker, she got a sprinkler system in place, she got an automotive paint booth in place, she got a parking lot put up, she got a learning resource center, she got a student center in place. And there's computers and everything's energy efficient. And those are with ARA monies that she knew how to work, get in place. We didn't have to put any special conditions. We didn't have to get any federal people out to help her know how to do it. She did it, and it was wonderful. And so when we listen and we hear that appropriations that were to come to her that she had depended on weren't there, we are concerned. And I agree with the previous speaker that we should never penalize somebody who does an outstanding, efficient, and effective job. And so, for example, Okuru opened, and we had some GCC programs up there, and she shares that the funding for those teachers, for those instructors, were never put in place for GDOE, so GCC funded them with the understanding that those monies would be somehow returned. But today they're not. And so when we look at this amount of money that was supposed to get to them but never made it to them, I absolutely agree that whatever we can do to get the monies to her, to continue for her to do her outstanding work, Mr. Speaker, where since 2007 we've seen a 41% increase in student enrollment, where every time a GCC contingent goes off island, they come back with national awards, where they open their doors and they partner huge with GDOE. And on our Manila campus, there are at least 700 GW geckos that go to the GCC campus to use the library or the CT for continuing education. And so it's a wonderful snapshot of what can happen when everybody works together, when everybody is serious, when they have the planning and the organization. And further than that, Mr. Speaker, when you talk to her faculty and her staff, everybody's happy. Everybody's working hard. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and everybody's incredibly productive. And so if this 1.6 can help her do even more work, to help her rest a little bit easier about where the funding is going to come from for this continued work, I hope that everybody in this hall will support that and will pass that so that we can keep the good work going on at the Guam Community College. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yamashita. Senator Munya Barnes.
Si Dios Masi, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to stand and rise in support of 84-32 COR. Mr. Speaker, when this bill was first introduced, there was some concerns of why again is the legislature raiding the Tourist Attraction Fund? And I said, it happens to come to me over and over and over. And sometimes I feel like saying on the legislative channel, I'm just going to put up what the enabling legislation of Chapter 912 Guam Code Annotated says and what the enabling mission is for this fund. And I said, okay, for the sake of those who question what we do here, I want to note that when the Guam Visitors Bureau's enabling legislature was amended by Public Law 17-32, it listed its purpose, its definitions, and all the powers and the duties of what this fund was supposed to work with. And as you look at the purpose, we look at the Tourist Attraction Fund working to promote Guam visitors industry in such manner as it deems most reasonably appropriate, including providing, disseminating information materials, promoting Guam as a visitor destination. And then the list goes on. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 different items. But part of that important component of the purpose of this fund was to assist both government and private entities in the development, implementation, and promotion of programs to further education, training, employment assistance, and entrepreneurial development as it comes to promoting our island and to product our market. And when you look at what GCC does today, Mr. Speaker, for those who haven't looked at the enrollment of GCC and the programs they have, more specifically as it relates to the tourism industry, we talk about them having training in the food and beverage component, hotel management, hotel operations and management, marketing. We talk about office technology. We talk about tourism and travel management. We talk about travel and tour management. We talk about visual communications. We talk about all these other components as it relates to computers that is utilized, even medical assisting. And I can literally relate that programs that the Guam Community College has definitely falls in line with the mission mandate. Mr. Speaker, as an oversight chair of tourism, I have a duty and responsibility to make sure that as we promote this industry to the rest of the world, we need to be able to make sure that our product here on our beautiful island paradise is marketed right, it is done right, and that we have the expertise, and that we have the education, and that we have the training. And why should we have to take people from outside to come in when the facilities we have here on Guam are great? Not just good, but great to train our own people. Mr. Speaker, I'm not raiding the Tourist Attraction Fund. I'm making sure that the component needed to make sure that our local people and our folks here in the tourism industry has the resources it needs so that we can market Guam right. I think that's the right thing to do. Some people may complain, say that the funding that was asked for may be a little bit too much or way too much. I don't think it's too much resource to ask for when it's going to train our own people, to make sure that our people here on our island are educated and trained right by our own school, by our own community college. So after further discussion and after the testimony that was received from folks in the community, Mr. Speaker, I said, you know what? The numbers need to be shown here. And as we look at having 8,000 students in all the different certifications that GCC is giving in as far as education, I think that it's the right thing to give the community college the resources in order to train our own people. And as I agree with the last two, with the author of the legislation and the retiring speaker, Mr. Speaker, I just want to say that in my heart, this is the right thing to do. I know that there are going to be lots of other programs that will come and tap for resources. But Mr. Speaker, in all fairness and in making sure that we give the opportunity for our own people to be first trained, I have no problems agreeing with that and supporting this measure. So to that end, Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to rise in support of Bill number 84-32 as substituted, and I hope that my colleagues will look at the vision and see and share in the concept of supporting this effort, because it is about giving resources to our own students and making sure that the expertise and the learning ability is done right here at home. Sinamasi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator Limtiaco, then Senator Duenas. Anybody else after those two? Please, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to first off commend the author of this legislation for recognizing the importance of the college apprentice program that GCC administers, and also to take the time to recognize those very capable individuals at GCC, specifically Terry Barnhart and Terry Guerrero, who manage the apprentice program, as well as Vic Rogers. The apprentice program is near and dear to my heart, mainly because I help establish it at our family company, and our company does participate in taking unskilled labor and putting them through the apprentice program and providing them the skill training that's necessary to make them very productive members of our workforce. And I want to just highlight the fact that of those that have come through the apprentice program at Pacific Unlimited, 4 of them have increased their wages by 40%, just above minimum wage to making $12.50, almost $13 an hour, and that's in a span of less than a year for a commercial truck driver. And when we talk about our tourism industry, we need to talk about all facets of supporting that tourism industry. You know, transports has to be a critical component of that, considering that we import over 90% of our products. And to see these young individuals come out of the apprentice program 8 to 10 months after the fact, making 40% more wages, you got to not only take into consideration the benefit that they're providing to our society, but you have to take into consideration that these are people that are going to be less likely to go on subsistence programs in order to provide for their families because they are making more money. Additionally, the 40% increase in their wages are also contributing to our income tax revenue, and that has to be a very big component of this body's ability to grow revenues to our government by increasing wages. You know, just to comment on what the last speaker had inferred to, that this bill may be looked upon as raiding the tourist attraction fund. It's absolutely not that at all. We need to look at the tourism industry in its totality and the effect that it has on our economy. Supporting and providing skilled labor only benefits our tourism industry. By providing the skilled labor, we can increase the type of product quality that exists in our tourism industry right now. You hear a lot of the current GVB board members speaking about raising the quality level of our tourism industry from a perceived low-cost alternative to a higher quality luxury type item. Well, we just can't do that if we don't have the skilled labor in force to provide the type of customer service level that these tourists would expect from it. So I definitely rise in support of the bill, and I ask my colleagues to support it as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Limtiaco. Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise also in full support of Bill 8432 for many of the reasons that have been stated previously, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for many of those who know me, it's clear to a lot of folks that tourism is my first love. And actually, the industry in which I spent 16 years working prior to entering public service. I also have spent, and many of the colleagues here spent a good time with me in my first term last year, identifying opportunities for scholarship programs for our young people in a number and array of educational opportunities, to include the Trades Academy, GCC, and UOG, Mr. Speaker. So once again, I in particular, the immediate retiring speaker really made it clear and was very articulate on the point that to support these programs most certainly is to support building our tourism industry, building the skilled labor that's needed locally to have the type of jobs in this industry that will create opportunities for them and their families. Mr. Speaker, during the public hearing on this bill, I had an opportunity to ask the President if she would consider making sure that she set aside some monies in this appropriation for the purposes of funding her scholarship programs that we had all set in place. And she was very excited to do that. In fact, we came up with the term finish line with regard, and she recently used it for her 5K, which basically would identify those who qualify for these additional scholarships that more than likely otherwise may not have finished school because of obligations and not being able to afford to finish. What I did, Mr. Speaker, when she asked me, you know, what portion of the appropriation would you be looking at? And I just said, you know, Madam President, you were the best with your faculty to identify what category of folks that would be and who, of course, and how much money you would put to that program. But I just think it's worthwhile. In the same vein, Mr. Speaker, she mentioned to me that, you know, what would be the realities of this funding source. And, you know, of course, I told her at the time I didn't know. I'm sure that it was tracking the way the good chairman had pointed out. But perhaps there may be in the neighborhood of $1 million possibly available. And she had indicated that that would be definitely a welcomed amount of money. Subsequently, Mr. Speaker, I had an opportunity to talk with the president of UOG. And we had similar conversations with regard to, also funding a similar finish line type project or program in terms of the scholarships that they're currently administering, Mr. Speaker. And during these two conversations with the president from UOG and also the president up at GCC, it was really a great conversation of how well their realization is these days of the articulation from GCC to UOG and how well the programs are working together. And Mr. Speaker, while it is true, by and large, we know there's no question about it, the leader in Guam's workforce development is GCC. But we also know that a number of these individuals entering the tourism industry, the requirements on the higher level tiered jobs are those that require an actual Bachelor of Arts degree, 4-year degree from the University of Guam. So, Mr. Speaker, while I support this endeavor and will continue to support it, I proffer an amendment. And this would be starting out on page 2, and it would be on line 26, and it would strike out 1.5 million and say 1 million. And, Mr. Speaker, it would say, then, after everything is done, on the line 5, it would read, after funded, an additional $500,000 is appropriated to the University of Guam for scholarship programs that support our tourism industry. And Mr. Speaker, just in closing on this amendment, once again, the reason why I believe this is completely appropriate is the University of Guam has not raised its tuition in years and continues not to do so and be the best deal for our young people on Guam going there. But Mr. Speaker, they also have the need to be able to support these young people that otherwise cannot possibly finish. And these are outcomes as well on the national level that they're seeking to be able to accomplish. Money that will be well spent to allow these young people to finish their careers at the University of Guam, their degrees, and to move forward to support the industry. So, Mr. Speaker, that's my amendment at this time.
On the Duenas Amendment, who wishes to be heard? Senator Pangilinan. Anybody else wish to be heard on the Duenas Amendment? All right, followed by Madam Speaker. Speaker Pangilinan, you first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while I certainly support the University of Guam and continue to support the University of Guam, as a matter of fact, correctly so, as the retiring speaker who offered the amendment pointed out, University of Guam has not raised its tuition. And why? It's because this body, and certainly supported efforts that we had put forward that provided the additional resources to the University of Guam in order to avert a tuition increase. And as a matter of fact, we made acceptance of that additional appropriation and resources to the University of Guam in order to avert that tuition increase. And certainly, I understand the need and the desire to support other programs that, as we say, are close and dear to our heart. I just think that conversation has to be a little bit more expansive than, one single conversation between two individuals and then come and take something away from what we had was a full-blown public hearing on the needs of the Guam Community College. And, we haven't had the benefit of discussing with Dr. Underwood how the program works up there, what its requirements are, what its current resources are, and yet we're going to take $500,000 and give it to them. When the Guam Community College was, or this bill was being proposed for the Guam Community College, the Guam Community College came in and basically outlined what it's using the money for, what it has incurred in expenses, where it's short, why it can use this amount of money, and we've even had to reduce it because of our desire to be a bit more prudent in terms of ensuring that the resources are going to be there when we appropriate the money by continuing to recognize obligations as continuing appropriations older than what has been passed most recently by this body. So I don't disagree that we need to support the University of Guam. I don't disagree that the tourism program up there needs support and so forth. But I don't think we should do it in this fashion in terms of taking money away that is vitally needed by the Guam Community College at this time, given the shortages and the expansion and the programs that it has, and almost on a whim, you know, without everybody having the benefit of the discussion of why the program needs additional resources at the University of Guam, how is it going to use those resources, what its current resources are. And I think that when we have those conversations, maybe through the budget process, and we decide that we might want to then allocate resources during the budget process specific to that purpose in the scholarship programs that we have up there, then maybe that's the time to do it. Once again, it's just thoroughly vetting it out. And I really think it's a disservice to the Guam Community College to just cut off 500,000, you know, without having the other entity that's going to get that resource kind of have to go through the same process of justifying its needs at this time. So I respectfully recognize the desire of my colleague who's proposing this amendment to support the University of Guam. I don't disagree with him that that's something that we need to take a look at, but I don't really think that, and I do not support doing it in this manner, in this fashion, and taking it away from something that we know the Guam Community College vitally needs at this time and has been allocated for that. And so it's only for that reason. It's not that I don't think that we should be doing it. I just think we should be doing it with a bit more prudency, a bit more discussion through the process so that we all know what we're going to be doing and what the money is going to be used for, how it's going to deploy it, and so forth. And I think absent all that, I would like to request that my colleagues consider the needs of the Guam Community College, what it has done in order to justify this, where the money is going to go through, and therefore keep the appropriation at 1.5 for the Guam Community College. Thank you, and Sidusmas.
Thank you very much, Senator Ben. Do I interpret that to be opposition or objection? Okay, thank you. Madam Speaker, you asked to speak on the Duenas Amendment. And then Senator San Nicolas. Any other senator on the Duenas Amendment? Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know originally the bill that was introduced had a request of $2 million, and in the substituted version, we're saying 1.5. So there already exists a $500,000 shortfall. By having to take this additional $500,000 now for the University of Guam, which, of course, again, as the chairperson of education, I've no objections in the sense of supporting any one of our educational institutions. I'd like to remind, though, however, everyone that I don't recall the number of the bill that I had introduced at the request of the University of Guam that deals with scholarship monies. And in that bill, we have given the university so much flexibility, not just because of their autonomy, but more in terms of the university looking at its numbers, looking at the amounts that they've received for scholarships, and looking at the needs of the community and what is available for the university to give out for scholarships. And I'll give you two examples. We have not, the legislature in the past have developed certain scholarships for certain programs, and one of them, of course, was for teachers, because we needed to grow our own teachers rather than recruiting from off-island. So we were looking to our needs. The university also felt that with their marine lab, that is was well known throughout the world, is I think the second best marine laboratory in the world, decided that in order to bring more people, other resources to the island, it was to offer a scholarship in marine biology. Now that's not mandated by law. And then the other is they've decided to give out a scholarships at what they call the Regents Scholarship, and that's not mandated by law. So in essence, the university has the flexibility, depending, like I say, on data that's available to them, that if we say there's a certain dollar amount is given to you for scholarship and it's not very specific to a program, then the university has the flexibility to move the monies up or down or out to other programs. So the amendment that's proffered, of course, by, what bill is that you're from? From AFAME, the senator from AFAME, really are monies that within their scholarship monies that the university has, that they could very well even provide additional funding for that program. And just to ease everybody's mind too as well, is that, and this legislature, yes, has been very supportive. And we've actually appropriated, $3,599,000 to the University of Guam just for scholarships. And so therefore, there's definitely, room to be able to address, giving out these scholarships. Now, the reason why I'm saying we're going to give $500,000 for a specific program is not necessarily wise, and I'll say why. Because we have another program as well where a former colleague of ours have actually done the exact same thing, is to tie up a certain amount of money for a certain program, and they don't have the students going into that program to be able to use the money. So then by doing that, you're again tying the hands of the university. Those monies now every year get moved again into the following year or to be used for other scholarships when we do the budget every year. But we don't want to be able to do that, to tie the university's hands by being very specific that what we want to do is to give them then this flat amount to be able to determine what their needs are, what the needs are of our students who need the additional funding or need the funding for whatever programs may be available to them. But the bottom line for me now at this point is that we have a college that has been really very frugal, has been physically responsible. You have a president who goes out there, and I know because I've been on trips with her, and here we are for our PREL board meeting, and she is going and meeting with different departments and agencies that has never provided any funding or grant monies to her institution, and she would say, I've never received anything from you. I've never put in a request from you. This is what I have, and this is how it's tied to what you're doing, to your mission. Can you help me? I mean, she's so proactive to go out there and get monies wherever she can get her monies. But then with those, they're always tied. They're tied by federal grants to certain programs. Here, locally, through the general fund, and in this case now TAF, is that they're very specific. These are local monies now to support not just programs at the college, but even for some of their operational costs. And I know there will not be a single person here who would vote for this bill can ever question in their minds that those monies would not be squandered. They would be used wisely and to the highest extent possible. And because of that information that I've provided to you, I honestly, not like I'm saying, not supporting the fact that we wanted to go to the University of Guam, but more importantly is that because they have that flexibility in the almost $3.6 million for scholarships, whereas with GCC, we have not, as a matter of fact, and that was one of the things I want to do later on, is possibly extend some of that money that it could be taken over to the community college to be used as scholarships as well. And that's the next thing that I have that we're working on. But for now, I really would feel that every single penny that we're able to appropriate to the community college, I would really like for it to be used by the college. And we would, of course, we have the task now of trying to find the additional $500,000 to assist the community college. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too can appreciate the intent of the Senator from AFME for proffering this amendment. We always like to look out for both institutions as much as possible. For me, I'm comfortable supporting the original language of this bill because I understand the community college has a shortfall in these particular programs, and we want to make sure the money is going to be available for them to continue those programs because they're critical to various industries on our island. If we're going to be moving money from there, we're changing the entire conversation altogether. Because if we have money available for other things, I like to put a lot of things to the forefront of my mind that I believe are glaringly glaring problem areas in our government that we really need to address. I've went out and I've toured our high schools. Mr. Speaker, I've seen our bathrooms that our kids use. I've seen their locker rooms. Those are facilities that are not just used by our students, but when we have exchange students come in from Japan or anywhere else and go to our public schools, they see those disgusting conditions. And, you know, scholarships, of course, for tourism programs are very important, but Mr. Speaker, if we're talking about getting a longer lasting bang for our buck, putting 500 grand into renovating those facilities and making sure they last for a long period of time and being utilized by both our local students as well as being utilized by you know, students in student exchange programs. I mean, there are ways that we can justify it being applied to the TAF. So if there's money available, you know, for us to be shifting around, I would love to be able to shift it around into those areas as well. My understanding, though, of this bill is that we're being very, very disciplined in accessing money that's in the TAF for the community college because the community college programs are short. And if that's the case, then I would like for us to keep the original intention of the bill intact. Notwithstanding, it's important that we support scholarship programs. It's important that we get those bathrooms fixed. It's important that we improve the educational conditions of our public school students. But all those things notwithstanding, I think that the original intent of this bill as intended for the community college meets the mission of the Tourist Attraction Fund, and it helps the college to continue doing the good work that they've been doing up there. So I would prefer that we keep it intact, and I would like to also rise in agreement with the proffer of the amendment, but in reservation given the fact that we need to keep the money focused for its original intent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Snicholas. Any other senator wish to speak on the Duenas Amendment? There having been an objection, all those in favor of the Duenas Amendment, please indicate by raising your right hand. The motion fails. On the main motion, Madam Speaker? On the main motion.
On the main motion. Thank you again very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the bill, and I really want to thank the chairperson, of course, of tourism. I realize that the TAF is a guarded fund to always try to keep it specifically to tourism, and I thank, you know, of course, Speaker Pangilinan. He's always been, you know, an advocate of our educational institutions, not just being the finance guy, but really always looking out for our educational institutions. And I support this, not so much because I know I heard in the conversation during the public hearing that they want to make sure that tourism money stays in tourism, but we really are forgetting that there are a lot of things that the college does, and that is to respond primarily to, yes, tourism, to respond to the vocational industries, occupational industries, and our university does the same thing, but more in the academic side. The college itself, and if you look at the numbers that they gave us, and I think the numbers are like almost 700 students that are in the program that are closely linked to tourism. And even if you do some calculations when you're figuring this out, because it's a little bit different when you calculating just buying textbooks, you see, for students in a classroom and in real academic setting. But in the college, it's a little bit different. It's hands-on. It's being out in the world of work. And that definitely costs a lot of money. Laboratories cost a lot of money. per pupil. And this dollar amount is so minute, really, when you consider what it is that they're doing, that would eventually, as soon as these kids are done, they're able to go right out into the world of work. And they've proven themselves time and time again. Every time they go off island for any type of competition, they're always coming home with first place and second place. Rarely do we ever hear of them coming home empty-handed. And I think that, you know, when you think of their accomplishments, and you know, and unfortunately we're not in that at that mode now where we can actually give money based on performance, high performance, compared to just giving money whether they're actually performing or not. And in this one case, this money is linked, you know, to tourism, and that's why I rise in support of the bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Any other senator wish to speak on the main motion? On the main motion? Seeing no hands, I'll invite the sponsor to close.
Thank you, and Sidusmasi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for support on this bill as they've articulated as they spoke on it. And I'm sure that all of my other colleagues continue to follow the discussion and certainly are looking at the bill and certainly wish and request for their positive support on this bill. I think that, as we said, you know, we're trying to ensure that we provide the resources, and when they're there, they're going to be given. And so we've moved in that direction. We'd like to give more, but we want to ensure that what we give is available and will be given. And we certainly, I'm going to request for the governor's favorable consideration on this bill as well. And so, with that said, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make one final amendment, and that is to add Speaker Wampat as the third co-sponsor on the bill. And then I'd like to move then that the bill be placed in the third reading file for a vote.
Hearing no objection, so ordered. The next bill on the agenda, Senator Limtiaco, Bill 92.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to move Bill 92-32 to the third reading file. And I'd like the opportunity to speak on the bill.
Hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, Bill 92-32, an act to add a new sub-item 1 to 21 GCA 6103Q relative to defining a bed and breakfast, and as well as to amend 21 GCA 61305, 306, and 307 relative to adding a bed and breakfast to the list and uses permitted and conditional uses allowed in R1, R2, and commercial zone. Mr. Speaker, it's the intent of this bill to provide another opportunity to grow our economy and increase small business development by specifically allowing for use of such establishments as a bed and breakfast in the respective zones. Bill 92-32 attempts to tap existing capacity in the current residential real estate market to accommodate the growth in tourism and address the hotel room shortage. This bill attempts to create business opportunities for those that would like to pursue opening up their homes to our island visitors and offer our tourists a unique experience that engrosses them in our culture and aspects of our beautiful island that they seldom experience. The bill opens the opportunity to our southern villages, and all villages for that matter, to participate in our tourism market with little to no investment risk. During the public hearing, our good mayor from Assen, Mayor Joanna Blas, was present at the public hearing, and she took time to express her experience hosting Japanese families at their residence back in the day and how the additional revenue helped support her family. Bill 92-32 attempts to offer this exact type of opportunity to pursue opening up their homes to our visitors. I ask my colleagues for their support to help provide business opportunities for our people. You know, on the way into session today, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to speak on the radio regarding this, and there was a concern that was brought up by some callers regarding, the potential for, they had talked about sexual offenders specifically, and I'd like to thank the good senator from Sinahanya, Senator Ada, who proffered, or at least suggested that we improve the bill by adding an amendment. So at that time, I'd like to offer an amendment.
Please.
Okay. An amendment to subparagraph 1 of 6103Q. The following will read, no home may be licensed as a bed and breakfast whose physical address is the physical address of a registered sex offender. And I have that in writing.
Everybody hear that amendment? Anybody wish to speak on the amendment being proffered by Senator Limtiaco? Seeing no hands go up, and hearing no objection. Six. No, we're not in recess. On the first page, paragraph 1, 6103, 61103Q. All right, there being no objection to the amendment, on the main motion, I see Senator Munya Barnes' hand, then Senator San Nicolas. Anybody else after Senator San Nicolas? Senator Barnes.
Si Diyos Masitalo, Mr. Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to speak again and thank the good author of the legislation for making me be his co-sponsor and truly exemplifying the bipartisan support. Mr. Speaker, when we looked at tapping into new resources and bringing new ideas into our island as it relates to the economic driver for our island of Guam, and we all know that is tourism, one of the questions that was approached to me was, what could we do to add to the resources? And I said, as we look at turning away tourists because of lack of hotel rooms and all that, one concept that would come to mind that is not a new thing and has probably been in existence here on Guam for the last 40 years or 4 decades is the bread and breakfast concept. And when the good senator introduced legislation and asked me to support his efforts and to work with him on the measure, I said I fully support this bed and breakfast concept. I remember talking to folks in the tourist industry saying that the concept that exists that we have today, though unspoken, provides for that hospitality, that Chamorro gathering of showing hospitality, and more importantly, to really seeing what the island culture is all about. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, will allow that facility to be added as a conditional use in the R1, R2, and of course it's now in the commercial zone properties. When I noted last year that we lost 200 tourists because of the lack of hotel rooms, it really got to my stomach and saying what 200,000 tourists can relate to as it comes to monies coming in, resources and monies coming into our island. I said, if we don't do something today, it'll be a crying shame. This bill truly will address the critical shortage of the hotel rooms. I don't know if you know, Mr. Speaker, I was just talking to one of the board of directors who's the chairperson of the Japan market, and he said that this past week, Guam was at 90% and 100% capacity. And for me, that's music to my ears. That's gold to my ears, because when we hear that we're up that high, then we know that people are coming to visit us, and we know that tourists want to see our beautiful place. People want to spend time with their families here. People want to share that Chamorro hospitality and learn more about our culture, our heritage, and who we are as island people. And this will literally work on capitalizing the true Hafa spirit that we share here on Guam. And it's not, did I say gold to my ears? But anyways, gold to my heart, because we look at new ways to bringing resources in, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to say this is a win-win. So I thank the author for letting me be his co-sponsor, and I hope my colleagues support the efforts. Sinamasi.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Senator St. Nicholas, get some water.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to rise in full support of this bill. I think it's a fantastic idea. It builds capacity for our industry, and it allows our people to be entrepreneurs and to engage in the business spirit. And it does so with as little government regulation and intrusion as possible. I'm also very, very grateful for the sharp eye of Senator Ada and the author's quick amendment to address the sexual offender concern. That was also a primary concern of mine. But absent that, with the amendment as it stands, I think it's an excellent bill, and it's going to do a lot of good things for our island. So I just want to rise in support of it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard? Madam Speaker, and then Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think this is a wonderful bill, and I think it's great because we've all been very supportive of tourism, and we've heard many times that we don't have enough rooms. But the one great thing that I like about it, of course, is that we're bringing almost the entire island to be a part of our tourism industry and to be a part of providing, housing for them. We have, Guam families are not small. They're fairly large. And I think in every household you go to, you would find that every house would have about 3 to 5 bedrooms and for their families, for their children. But they all grow up eventually, and then they leave our homes, and now the parents are left with, so many empty rooms because their children are gone, and what do they do with them? And I think this would be a great opportunity for them to supplement their income by actually renting out then, those individual rooms. So I think it's great because we are now being very inclusive with everybody. We're taking it literally, some of the housing out of just the Tumon area, and now we're actually spreading it throughout the island. So that's one great thing. The only thing that I'm kind of curious, if I may ask, I'm not sure if the author will be able to answer this because this is going to be a new concept, but maybe somewhere else how it's being done, is that right now for anyone who has a single house to rent, the business license is $10. And if you have a duplex, then it's $25. Now in this case, one room. Do you have an idea what this may actually cost? Because I've been asked some of these questions and I really can't answer. I don't know, and maybe because it hasn't been established yet, we have no idea. But what in other places in your research, what are we looking at?
Do you yield?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. And just to address Madam Speaker's question, it was our intent that it would still fall under the same licensing requirements that she had mentioned regarding a single household or a duplex. Where the revenue stream would come from is in the 11 GC, excuse me, in 11 GCA Chapter 30 in regards to the hotel occupancy tax. So basically, these fees that are going to be generated, Madam Speaker, are going to come from the section of Chapter 30, 101 under imposition, which would make these rooms subject to the hotel occupancy tax as well. Hopefully that answers your question.
Is that satisfactory, Madam Speaker?
Well, that's good to know, because now then, of course, is that, and I understand that, but then at the same time, then will there be the other costs of the GRTs when they, because they have a business license now to rent, so then there'll be two separate taxes that then they'll have to pay. What I'm concerned about, and maybe that's something that we might have to work with the appropriate agencies, is to try to, I guess, streamline it, make it easy enough, you know, for Tanana and Tunuse to participate in a program like this, you know, for them to be able to rent out, you see, you know, the extra rooms in their homes. And I'm just hoping that, you know, that we don't turn off some of them, because we've made it so complex that they're unable then to participate, because then there's the understanding, yes, of the hotel occupancy tax, and then there's the business privilege tax and whatever else. I don't know, this is not something we want to mandate, but by actually just speaking about it here and hoping that the author then would work with the departments and agencies, the appropriate departments and agencies, to see if we can find a smooth way to make this easier for our families who are not normally, you know, in the business really of, you know, I mean, like entrepreneurs, but just maybe something to occupy their room. So I don't know whether, and if I may ask, if you have spoken maybe to anyone about this, to see if there's a process or a procedure to help, you know, Tanana and Tunuse.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I do yield to the question. And what we tried to do was to make this piece of legislation as without mandating all the specifics about it, and basically regulating the entire business opportunity to death. What we had done is left it to the development of the industry to determine the standards. For example, when we talk about the market and how it will appeal to different visitors to our island, we're going to leave that to the market industry to allow for the supply to meet the demands of the customers. But going back to the licensing, what we envisioned would be similar to a household rental. As you mentioned, the licensing fees for renting out a house or a duplex, those would remain consistent with the current regulations. And we did take into consider the business privilege tax, and we also took into consideration the existing Santos Amendment, which probably would fall under that for a lot of these single room rentals, probably never exceeding the $40,000 annual mark, to be subject to the business privilege taxation. So it's our belief that it wouldn't, per home or per bed and breakfast establishment, that they'd probably still fall within the boundaries of the Santos Amendment and be at $40,000 of revenue, would not be subject, the initial $40,000 would not be subject to business privilege tax. However, we also saw the need to have it still inclusive of the hotel occupancy tax, so that it will drive revenues into our islands, as well as our government. Hopefully that clarifies it, Madam Speaker.
Is that satisfactory, Madam Speaker?
Yes, yes. I mean, I do understand that. And I'm just thinking now from the perspective of private, individuals who normally would be renting out their house, and granted, maybe it's not as much per month versus maybe per day. But then when you calculate the taxes, and yes, the Santos Amendment, I understand that is 4% of your gross receipt taxes that you would pay beyond then the $40,000. But with the hotel occupancy tax, I'm not quite sure, but that's like what, 11%, 10%, and so of course there's the variance, and I'm just trying to think how how then do we help, you know, some of our families who are not really out in the business world, but, you know, just to make sure, one, they have individuals that are there, they can supplement their income in their retirement, you know, in the retirement years. And, you know, when you weigh the two of the 4% gross receipt tax from regular monthly rental versus now, of course, the bed and breakfast, rental of a room, and at 10%. So those are just some of my thoughts, and, you know, and I'm hoping then that the dialogue will continue to make it as easy a process. But in spite of all those questions, I do stand in support of the bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have Senator Pangilinan, Senator McCready, and then Senator Uggan. Anybody else wish to be heard after those three? You're after Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you, and Sidus Masi, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I certainly rise in support of this legislation. We all know, and we all have had experiences in terms of playing host to off-island guests. And we've all done that in our personal capacities. Some of us have actually done it in terms of working with other individuals off-island. I remember Speaker Wampat, during her early term, was very instrumental in working with I think it's Otaki, or from the Omiaga Prefecture, for the homestay programs. And every year, the school at that prefecture would send over 35 to 65 students. And we had actually worked it with Peter Mellon at that time, husband of Katrina Mellon, who would work at PDN for the longest time. And we would facilitate that in a partnership with Tamuning Elementary School. And so all these kids would come, stay for close to 2 weeks to a month sometimes with the families of Tamuning Elementary School parents and students. But that wasn't a for-profit, but that was an extension of Chamorro hospitality to our off-island guests. And when Speaker Wampat was not able to carry that on because she wasn't in the legislature at that time, she had asked me to assist, and so I took over that program and continued to work with it while I was in the legislature. And but it's this kind of concept, I guess, that we want to extend, but allow our people who want to extend this through not a structured program to individuals who come to visit Guam through the facilitation of allowing them to be able to establish themselves, get their licenses, and make a little money at it, in addition to showcasing our culture and our family life here on Guam. So in that respect, I certainly approve of this. You know, it really is, I think, the foundation for what we're trying to do with even GVB's We Are Guam campaign. It's what are we all about if we are not about our families, our homes, our culture, and the experiences that we can share with our visitors. My father's brother was a priest, Mr. Speaker, here on Guam, and he actually had the opportunity to live in Japan and go to school in Japan prior to World War II. So he was very fluent in Japanese, and right before war broke out, they actually sent him back home. So he didn't get caught in the war in Japan, but they sent him back to Saipan at that time where my grandparents were living, and so he was fortunate in that respect. But he'd always then had a love for the Japanese people and the Japanese culture. And so even after the war, when he was in religious life, he always had a connection to the Japanese people. And one of the things he started doing actually was actually performing weddings. At that time, the bishop allowed the priests to do civil ceremonies even within the churches. And since my uncle was stationed up at Agana Heights at San Fidelis Friary, he had many friends, Japanese friends, that he reconnected with after the war. And the tourism companies here would approach him, and so he would um, performed the civil ceremony for these Japanese tourists who came to Guam to get married. And he not only wanted to do that, he did it in Chamorro and he did it in Japanese, so he was able to share that. But then he would call up my mom and dad after performing the ceremony and says, you know, I feel really sorry and really sad for these people because they just got married and nobody's can host a fandango for them. So can I take them to your house? And can you feed them and do a fandango for them? And so sometimes 2, 3 times a week, we would have, you know, 5, 10 Japanese couples come to my mom and dad's house, and we would barbecue and sing and play music, and they would all be there to enjoy their Chamorro fandango at our house. And we just did this because my uncle asked us to do it. But it's the sharing of that Chamorro culture that I think is so important. And I bring this up because it's the connection that people make and how does it translate into the tourism industry. To this day, sometimes my parents still get a card, but now with pictures of grandkids that come and visit or say, you know, we remember being at your house when we got married. Here's our first child. Here's our second child. And they would exchange these pictures with us. And sometimes they'd just show up. They'd come here for a visit with their children, and they'd come and visit my mom and dad because we had hosted them. But it's that connection, and I think that's so important that GVB kind of captures this. And I think allowing us to open up our homes and make a little bit of money at the same time is the way to do this and build a foundation for a sustainable cultural tourism program. And so I certainly thank the author for finding the economic opportunity here for our people in this, while for us, when we were doing this and hosting all of those people, we were just looking at the cultural opportunity to share our culture with these people. But to translate that into economic opportunity for our people is a good thing, and I stand in support of this. I do want to offer one amendment, Mr. Speaker, maybe a couple of amendments, but the first amendment I want to offer is that we have to distinguish between a bed and breakfast home and a bed and breakfast inn. And I think you'll find that in other jurisdictions as well. And I think looking at the bill and how it was drafted, we're talking about a bed and breakfast home, not an inn itself. And so I would like to add in the definition section of the bill, which is on page 1, line 3, under bed and breakfast, rather than having it read a building containing 5 or fewer homes intended or designed to be used, or which are used, rented, or hired out to be occupied, or which are occupied for sleeping purposes. I'd like to amend that so that it reads, a private residence or building appurtenant or accessory to a private residence containing 5 or fewer homes. So that sometimes these inns are not totally connected, that they're kind of an accessory building in a home residential setting. So the definition that I would like to add is what I'm offering. I'm sorry I didn't pass it out, but I have it written down for the clerk if the body should. So it will be a private residence or building appurtenant or accessory to a private residence containing 5 or fewer homes, intended or designed to be used, for which are used, rented, or hired out to be occupied, or which are occupied for sleeping purposes.
That's going on line 3.
Yes, line 3. Strike building and add the words private residence or building appurtenant or accessory to a private residence containing 5 or fewer rooms, such as et cetera, et cetera.
Does anybody need to see this? You okay? All right. All right. There is a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the mover of the amendment will yield to a question, and I just wanted to find out if this amendment would eliminate townhomes or condos for use as a bed and breakfast.
I don't. I don't believe it would, but it could. And so,
You wish to take a short break?
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
we should just take
Okay.
a short.
Short recess.
We'll take a short recess. Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that during the recess we've been able to confer among my colleagues who had that question. I think we've been able to resolve some of those concerns, and that we're not proposing an amendment at this time
Okay,
on
thank
that
you.
matter. Um, so, um, did we call for the vote on the amendment, or?
Not yet. I was going to ask if anybody else wished to speak on the amendment, on the Pangilinan amendment. Any objection? None.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other amendment I have, which I don't have written, is, you know, we have hotels that, of course, we know how many rooms they have and so forth, so we're able to assist individuals, companies that are, and organizations that are coming to Guam to take a look at that. And so maybe, I think just for assistance to these homeowners or these bed and breakfast operators, in terms of allowing the muscle of GVB's marketing arm to help them in promoting their own facilities, perhaps that something like allowing or requiring these bed and breakfast operators may register their facilities with the Guam Visitors Bureau Authority for, you know, so, and again, that's really to assist these bed and breakfast operators so that when GVB goes out, they have the information, they can pass them out and assist them in marketing. So it would be to add a new section to the bill that would allow these companies to, or these operators to register their facility with the Guam Visitors Bureau.
All right. On the amendment, Senator Ogden, on the amendment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the good sponsor of the amendment would like to consider imposing that, because I understand that the taxi drivers, operators right now are required to register with GVB if in fact they're going to service our visitors. And one of the things that was recently shared with me by a very good friend of mine is if you take a look at the overall presentation of the Guam brand, it would be inclusive upon the passage of this provision into law. It would extend beyond and go apply to the bed and breakfast. So I would like to move that rather than may register, that they shall register, so that in fact GVB would also acknowledge what other facilities may be available out there in terms of accommodating our visitors to Guam. So I would like to proffer that amendment to the amendment that the good senator is pushing forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On the Ogden amendment? You wish to speak on the Ogden amendment? Okay. Senator Nicholas?
Just a point of inquiry, Mr. Speaker. I'm just trying to structurally have this make sense to me now. So, would you need to? This is a question I guess I can pose to Senator Uggan and his amendment. Would you need to therefore get a business license first and then register at GVB, or would you register at GVB first and then go and get a business license? I'm just trying to have the process make sense to me.
Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the good senator. In this particular case, anytime that you're going to proceed and operate a bed and breakfast or any business for that matter, you need to acquire the business license, and that will legitimize your operation. And then I would think that after that, then you can register with the Guam Visitors Bureau in this case.
Is that satisfactory, Senator?
It is, Mr. Speaker. It just raises a concern of mine, because then if you already get the license to operate as a bed and breakfast, but you don't register, then are we now going to create some kind of penalty scheme for those who fail to register at GVB but operate as a bed and breakfast using the license that they obtained without registering the operation? That's just my next question, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, and I think I lost the sponsor. Do you wish to restate your question, Senator Nicholas?
I do understand, Mr. Speaker, and you know, the good senator brings up a very, very legitimate issue in terms of how far are we going to be able to carry this entire provision, because even the establishment and the allowance of bed and breakfast operations, the question is now, do we have sufficient safeguards in place where in fact the Guam brand will not be negatively impacted? And I think the sponsor of the original legislation, by inserting the restriction on sexual predators or convicted felons, certainly that's moving in the right direction. But then the real question is, by virtue of expanding the opportunities into bed and breakfast and providing that type of operation for the visitors industry, are there sufficient safeguards? And I think that that's really where the question is coming from. Do we have or are these operators now, if in fact they don't register with GVB, going to be penalized? I would think that you would want to register with GVB so that in fact if there's an overflow of 200,000 visitors to our island, then certainly they would be directly the beneficiaries of any such overflow in terms of our visitors coming to Guam. So I would think that not only should we necessitate it because GVB, as well as all of the stakeholders within the visitors industry, and primarily the people of Guam, we are selling a product. And because we are selling a product, we need to ensure that these particular enterprises or operations are properly registered. And I think by virtue of having them register at the revenue tax, they may register as a business operation separate and apart from B&B unless there's going to be that specific classification. They may register as a lodging facility or as a rental facility and then allow for usage for B&B, bed and breakfast operation. So there's a lot of questions, Mr. Speaker, and the good senator brings up a very pertinent issue in this case, is how can we enforce the registration of bed and breakfast operators in terms of them registering with the Guam Visitors Bureau. And I think by virtue of requiring it, it's only going to benefit their operation. And it's only going to benefit our tourists in terms of sustaining and continuing to promote the Guam brand. I know I didn't respond directly to the question. The issue is, do we want to start establishing a penalty associated with that? Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
We'll take a short recess.
Mr. Speaker, if I may,
Please.
I just want to share a comment by the nature of technology, and this is an explanation from someone who works directly in the taxi industry. And it says the reason why the taxi drivers have to get GVB clearance is because when GVB gets a complaint of a certain driver ripping off a tourist, GVB can deny that particular taxi company or that particular taxi driver from getting a license. And it makes the business clearance opportunity that much more stringent because you're dealing with our visitor industry, and we continue to tout that it's our #1 industry here on island. But, Mr. Speaker, I understand that there are some concerns and some reservations with regards to imposing this requirement, and I think that the issue here, more or less, is allowing the process to be established first. And then down the road, if in fact the sponsor of the legislation or any member of this august body would like to impose it as a requirement, then certainly I would be supportive of that if I so happen to be in this body at that point in time. But, Mr. Speaker, I certainly, at this time, because I don't want to stifle any further discussion with regards to, I'm saying I would not live forever. But, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to rescind my amendment to the amendment of the word shall, and I guess return to that particular discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. All right, was it the St. Nicholas amendment? Oh, no, it was Pangalinen's. On the Pangilinan amendment, anybody else wish to be heard? All right. Anybody else wish to speak on the Pangilinan amendment? All right, we'll take a short recess.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since Senator Uggan has withdrawn his amendment to the amendment now would just stand that to require them to allow them to register, which would be to add a new section that says bed and breakfast operators may register their facility with the Guam Visitors Bureau. And that would be my amendment.
Any objection? Anything further, Senator?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that I guess I kind of was looking a little bit on the Guam Code annotated, and just to be definitive that bed and breakfast operations are what we would call, according to our statutes, transient accommodations. And maybe just put on the record that as transient accommodations, that is really the basis for assessing the hotel occupancy tax. And so if bed and breakfast are transient accommodations, then the tax that would be applied to this would be, 10% of the daily or nightly charge for occupation of that transient accommodation. There was earlier discussion on how do you tax this? Is it a GRT tax or is it a hotel occupancy tax? And so from what I can gather in terms of making the reading, although it's not very specific, when you describe what the service that's being provided for, which is transient accommodation, then the tax that would be applicable to the operation of a bed and breakfast would be the hotel occupancy tax. And I just wanted to state that for the record so that if there may be some differing interpretation that perhaps, unless there's any objection, I think that is the intent of the adding this as an operation for the tourist-related facility, most especially in providing transient accommodations to our tourists.
Thank you very much, Senator Pangilinan. Senator McCready, you're recognized. The main motion, please. And then Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to rise in full support and congratulate my colleague, Senator Limitiaco and Munya Barnes, for a fantastic idea that will help house nearly 200,000 visitors to our island. I also like to commend him on the amendment he made earlier on the sexual offender not being able to register as a bed and breakfast. But I do have a few concerns now that we open that can, and I don't believe that we should just limit it to sexual offenses or sexual offenders. And before I proffer an amendment, Mr. Speaker, I would like to call for a recess and talk amongst the body, and including the author, to what language we could add into this bill that encompasses more than just a sexual predator. Because I wouldn't want to go to a foreign island or go to a island in Hawaii or a California bed and breakfast with any type of criminal activity going on or any type of criminal living in that house who's offended or is in the process of going through a trial. I'm not sure of the language that we could put into this bill to ensure the safety of our visitors. But I would love to call for a recess and talk to the author and the body and maybe get some of your discretion as to how we could write this into the bill, Mr. Speaker.
On the request for a short recess, we stand in recess for a few minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you for the recess. I will work with the sponsor on coming up with a criteria on a standalone bill. But once again, I'd like to offer my complete support to the author and the intent of this bill, and I urge all my colleagues to do the same. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Senator Agon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon to you and all of our colleagues. Mr. Speaker, you know, there was a couple of comments shared with us from previous speakers in regards to the definition of B&B, bed and breakfast facility, falling into the category of transient lodging. And just because, and I think that because in this particular case, Bill number 92 would codify an operation and legitimize an open operation, whether it be bed and breakfast, as it applies in this case. I would like to proffer an amendment, and obviously I stand in support of this legislation because, like everyone has said, it would create an opportunity to expand our visitor industry, provide that personal visitation, and also allow our visitors to visit directly with some of our families within the visitor industry. So, Mr. Speaker, if I can proffer a couple of amendments, and this would be more or less in Chapter 11, Guam Code Annotated Chapter 30, where in fact we're including bed and breakfast facilities, but please do not misread this that I may I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, for the slight interruption, but there's an amendment that you'll be receiving very shortly, and it would insert the bed and breakfast facilities into the definition of transient occupant lodging. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move for the insertion in Chapter 11, Guam Code Annotated, Chapter 30, I'm trying to slow this down so that, in fact, it'll give our colleagues the opportunity to be able to get a copy of the proposed amendment. But you do have it before you, Mr. Speaker. It is the first amendment will be subsection 30-101, imposition, where it would read, an excise tax is hereby levied and imposed, and it will go on against transient occupants of a room or rooms in a hotel, lodging house, and to insert the words, and bed and breakfast facility, comma, and then continue on with that particular definition or that particular paragraph. So the entire paragraph will read, an excise tax is hereby levied and imposed, which shall be assessed and collected monthly against transient occupants of a room or rooms in a hotel, lodging house, and bed and breakfast facility or similar facility located on Guam, according to the following schedule. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to proffer that. And like I shared with you, I think that because we are officially codifying and authorizing the establishment of bed and breakfast facilities or temporary lodging facilities for our visitors, that we certainly should incorporate that into the definition. So that would be the first amendment, Mr. Speaker.
On the first Agon amendment, any senator wish to be heard on it? On the first Agon amendment, any senator wish to be heard? Any objection?
Thank you.
Senator Agon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you very much, colleagues. And to be consistent throughout that particular chapter, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move that the definitions component, which is subsection A in subsection 30102, that also bed and breakfast facility be inserted into that particular definition, just for purposes of being consistent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the second Agon amendment, any senator wish to be heard? On the second Agon amendment, any senator wish to be heard? If not, any objection?
And
Thank you, Senator
once
Agon.
again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to stand here in support of this particular legislation, and I think it's always great when we're looking at expanding our visitor industry and the opportunities for our visitors to be able to experience the island way of life. And none is better than, in conjunction with attending a lot of our fiestas and our parties, being able to share in some of our families, our Guam residents' household, at least even in a short-term basis. So this would create that opportunity, hopefully not only increase revenues, but most importantly allow our visitors, some of our visitors, to be able to have that Guam Island experience. So I stand in full support of this legislation, and I commend the sponsor for pushing forward with this proposal. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Agon. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Seeing no hands, I invite the sponsor to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of my colleagues for their valuable input. As typical, the body as a whole has created a bill that's better and stronger. You know, and I want to just say a few words about our southern villages and the type of feeling that even our local residents have when we travel down there on any given weekend. When I lived off island for the longest time, I was always asked by people who had never been here before, what's it like living on Guam? You know, and I recall those trips down south, and I really hope that this bill has a potential, granted that if it's passed, that we can really expose not only our visitors from Japan, but you know the growing population, the growing visitors in Russia and Korea, to that type of lifestyle. Because I believe that if they are exposed to it, they're going to want to come back time and time again. I'd also like to take this opportunity to also add Speaker Ben Panglinen as a co-sponsor for the bill, as well as Senator Frank Uggan for their valuable input. And I would also like to make a motion that it be sent down to the third reading file. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the co-sponsors, hearing no objection. On sending the bill down, any objection? Thank you very much, Senators. The next bill on the agenda, Madam Speaker, is Bill 100.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a motion to place Bill 100-32 LS in the third reading file, and I'd like to just briefly discuss it.
Hearing no objection.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when Bills 95 and 100 were first introduced, DOA, Department of Administration, started to look into all on-claim and unpaid refund checks or general government checks. And in April 22nd, the governor then ordered the publication of a list of individuals that have not claimed their income tax refund checks in an effort then to try to distribute as many of those checks. 6,000 checks remained unclaimed, and out of that, originally the numbers were at $19 million, and since the publications of these names, $6,000 million $3 million has been distributed. Therefore, approximately $6 million were distributed, leaving then now a balance of $3 million. So although policies of the Internal Revenue Service do not require the publication of unclaimed tax refund checks, the governor sought the income tax refund checks be returned to the rightful owners. However, that despite efforts to return unclaimed tax refund checks, there might still be instances where some of these checks continue to remain unclaimed. So under such circumstances, Guam law requires that unclaimed or unpaid tax refund checks, which remain unclaimed or outstanding for more than 3 years from the date of audit, shall be paid into the treasurer as revenue to the general fund. So as of then May 22nd, millions of dollars then have been paid out. What the bill hopes to do is that these escheated funds, which were from income tax refund, that we would like to be able to capture those monies and put it into a income tax reserve fund. So if these are income tax going out, monies going out to individuals who rightfully own these monies, and if they're unclaimed, it continues to go into this reserve fund to continue then to be used again for income tax returns. Now, and I'm sure everyone understood how this had all started out, and we've basically kind of extracted other amounts to be appropriated for this particular escheatment funds. It will be to be used and deposited into the income tax refund reserve fund to help expedite tax refund payments to our taxpayers. So I hope that our colleagues will see fit and understand the intent that that it is still going to go back to the taxpayers. Thank you again very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. On Bill 100 on the main motion, any senator wish to be heard? Speaker Pangilinan. Any other senator? I see there's going to be an amendment. Why don't we take just a short break so you can run copies? It looks fairly lengthy. We'll stand in recess until 9 tomorrow morning.